What if the most powerful man in the world, a man who once sat in the Oval Office, was caught on tape whispering three words that could shatter everything you thought you knew about justice in America? Name your price? Imagine it. The former president, not in a rally, not behind a podium, but allegedly behind closed doors, voice lowered, bargaining with the very people sworn to uphold the law, not asking for leniency, not pleading for fairness, but begging for evidence to disappear. Evidence tied to the brutal, shocking murder of Charlie Kirk, a young conservative firebrand, just 31 years old, gunned down in broad daylight at Utah Valley University. The tape, CNN says, has it all: the offers of money, the promises of favors, the desperation dripping from every word. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But let's pause for a moment. Because before we can even process the gravity of what's being alleged here, we have to confront a chilling question. Why now? Why is this surfacing at this exact moment? Just as Tyler Robinson, the accused gunman, sits behind bars facing the possibility of a death sentence. Why would Donald Trump, a man who prides himself on strength and dominance, allegedly resort to begging, literally begging, the FBI to erase the trail? And more importantly, what does he have to lose if that trail remains? This isn't just another headline. This isn't just politics as usual. This is a story that pulls at the very threads of America's faith in justice. A beloved activist is dead. A suspect is in custody. DNA evidence has been announced. The governor has weighed in. The FBI director himself has gone on record. And yet, hovering over it all, is this bombshell, a leaked tape that threatens to turn the entire case upside down. Close your eyes for a second. Picture the scene at Utah Valley University. Hundreds gathered under the open sky, eager to hear Charlie Kirk speak. The buzz of conversation, the energy of a crowd primed for one of his fiery speeches. And then, chaos. Gunshots tearing through the air. Screams. People ducking, running, panicking. In the middle of it all, Kirk collapsing, blood staining the ground. The nation stunned, the conservative movement shaken to its core. And in the days that followed, a 22-year-old man named Tyler Robinson, dragged into the spotlight, accused of carrying out the unthinkable. But then came the twist. A screwdriver, a towel, a rifle. Forensic science linking Robinson's DNA to the crime scene. A supposedly airtight case, reinforced by the FBI's director himself. Kash Patel standing on Fox and Friends, declaring that the evidence was positively processed, confirming Robinson as the man in custody. It should have been clear. It should have been straightforward. And yet, it wasn't. Because suddenly, as if from the shadows, this tape emerged. And on that tape, according to CNN, was none other than Donald Trump, allegedly pleading for the destruction of the very evidence that tied Robinson to the murder. Ask yourself, what would compel a man like Trump to do this? He's been accused of many things before: cover-ups, obstruction, corruption. But this is different. This isn't about documents in Mar-a-Lago. This isn't about hush money. This is about the murder of a political ally. About a crime that rocked the conservative base. If the evidence is real, then Trump wasn't just protecting himself. He was potentially protecting someone else. Or silencing a truth too dangerous to come out. And that's where the real suspense begins. Because, as explosive as the leak sounds, CNN has remained careful. They've teased the existence of the tape, described snippets of dialogue, painted the picture of Trump's desperation. But they haven't released the full recording. Not yet. Which leaves us hanging in that dangerous place between truth and speculation. Between certainty and suspicion. Between believing the story and questioning whether we're being manipulated by timing, by politics, by media agendas. Let's dig deeper. Timing matters in stories like this. Think about it. Robinson is refusing to cooperate. The FBI says they have DNA, but skeptics whisper about planted evidence. Kirk's supporters are demanding justice. And then, suddenly, the most polarizing figure in modern American politics is dragged into the narrative with a leak that feels almost too perfect, too cinematic, almost scripted. Which begs the question, who benefits from this leak? And why now? But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's rewind to Trump's alleged words. Name your price. 3 syllables that carry centuries of weight. Because bribery, in the corridors of power, isn't new. From Watergate to Iran-Contra, from Nixon's tapes to Clinton's scandals, America has lived through leaders who thought they could outsmart the system. But this goes beyond power games. If the tape is authentic, it is a direct assault on the very foundations of justice. Not just bending the law, but trying to erase it altogether. Now, some of you watching might be thinking, come on, this sounds too outrageous. Trump begging the FBI? Really? And you wouldn't be wrong to question it. After all, the man built his brand on dominance, on projecting strength. The image of him reduced to bargaining in hushed tones is jarring. It cuts against the persona he's crafted for decades. And yet, that's exactly why it sticks. Because desperation, when it seeps through, is always more believable than bravado. Let's step back into the courtroom of public opinion. On one side, you have Trump's defenders already dismissing the tape as fabricated, as deep state theater. On the other, you have his critics, pouncing on it as proof of everything they've warned about for years. And caught in the middle are millions of Americans, unsure of who to trust, wondering if the truth is being dangled in front of them like bait in a political war. But here's where things get darker. Because this story isn't just about Trump. It's not just about Robinson. And it's not even just about Kirk. It's about the FBI, the very institution at the center of it all. If CNN's leak is accurate, then the Bureau was directly pressured by a former president to obstruct justice. And that raises the most chilling question of all. Did they comply? Did they bend? Did they even hesitate? Because if they did, then we're not just looking at a scandal. We're staring into the abyss of a corrupted system. And that's where the introduction ends. With you sitting there, weighing the gravity of this moment. A tape that could destroy reputations. A murder that shook a movement. A suspect who won't talk. And a nation teetering between believing the unbelievable and disbelieving the undeniable. But what comes next will only pull us deeper into the shadows. Because if you thought the leak was the most shocking part of this story, you're wrong. What came after changed everything, and no one saw it coming. Picture this, a newsroom buzzing, journalists hunched over glowing screens, editors pacing with phones pressed to their ears. Then suddenly, chaos. Not because of breaking election results or a war erupting overseas, but because a leak lands in their laps that could set the political world on fire. A tape, an alleged recording, and not just of anyone, but of Donald Trump, the former president, the headline magnate, the man whose every word has been scrutinized for years. This time, though, it wasn't a rally rant or a Truth Social post. It was something far more sinister. Name your price. 3 words whispered in desperation. 3 words CNN claimed were directed at the FBI. 3 words tied not to politics as usual, but to the blood-stained aftermath of the Charlie Kirk murder case. Think about the gravity of this for a moment. CNN, one of the biggest news outlets in the world, doesn't just throw out claims without weighing the consequences. They knew what this would mean. They knew the tidal wave it would unleash. And yet, the story went live, spreading like wildfire across every platform, rattling not just political insiders, but ordinary Americans who sat in disbelief. Could it really be true? Could a former president, a man still holding enormous influence over millions, really be caught begging federal agents to destroy evidence? But let's rewind. How did the tape surface? And why now? According to CNN insiders, the leak came from a source familiar with the investigation, a phrase we've all heard countless times, but one that always carries more weight when the stakes are this high. A source familiar with the investigation. That could mean someone inside the FBI. It could mean someone in Trump's own orbit. It could even mean a whistleblower with nothing left to lose. Whoever it was, they didn't just hand over a rumor. They handed over a recording. And that, in journalism, changes everything. You see, rumors are easy to dismiss. Whispers can be denied. But a tape? A tape is visceral. It's real. It's a voice. You can't argue with a voice. And according to CNN, that voice was unmistakable. Trump's. CNN described the audio as hushed, urgent, almost unrecognizable compared to his usual bombast. Not the blaring, self-assured bravado of campaign rallies, but something else. Something fragile. Something terrified. Name your price. The words were allegedly followed by promises, offers of money, power, favors. The kind of offers only someone who has walked through the highest corridors of power could make. The implication was clear. Trump didn't just want evidence hidden. He was willing to trade anything to make it vanish. Now pause for a moment. Ask yourself, what kind of evidence would drive him to such desperation? We're not talking about old tax returns or embarrassing emails. This wasn't about optics. This was about a murder. The murder of a rising conservative figure, someone Trump's base admired, someone tied to the very movement that fueled Trump's own power. So why interfere? Why risk everything to bury evidence in a case where justice seemed straightforward? Unless, of course, there was more beneath the surface. And that's exactly why CNN's leak was so explosive. Because it didn't just raise questions about Trump. It raised questions about the entire case. About Robinson's role. About the DNA. About whether the story we'd been told was the full story, or just the version we were allowed to see. Now let's talk about the reaction. The moment the leak hit airwaves, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok went into meltdown. Clips of CNN anchors repeating, "Name your price," on loop. Memes, hashtags, outrage. On the left, celebrations, proof. They said that Trump was exactly what they'd always accused him of being. On the right, fury, fake news. They shouted, "A smear campaign timed to perfection." The culture war flared like gasoline on fire. But it wasn't just the public who reacted. Behind the scenes, Washington trembled. Politicians scrambled to draft statements. Lawyers debated the legal weight of a leaked tape that hadn't been authenticated. And inside the FBI? Silence. Deafening silence. They refused to confirm. They refused to deny. They simply let the story hang, fueling speculation that maybe, just maybe, CNN had nailed them to the wall. And here's the thing. CNN didn't even release the full tape. They played fragments, snippets, carefully edited descriptions. Enough to tantalize. Enough to provoke. But not enough to settle the matter. Which only deepened the intrigue. If the full recording exists, why withhold it? Was CNN protecting its source? Was it waiting for the perfect moment to drop the hammer? Or, here's the darker thought. Was the full recording less damning than the highlights suggested? That's the danger of leaks. They give just enough to ignite suspicion, but never enough to satisfy it. And that's exactly why this story dug its claws into the national psyche. Now, let's confront a contradiction. Trump has always prided himself on his toughness, his refusal to back down. The idea of him begging? It seems unthinkable. And yet, the leak paints him in exactly that light. A man cornered, desperate, willing to barter anything. The very image his enemies would salivate over. Which makes you wonder, if this were fake, wouldn't Trump immediately sue CNN into oblivion? Wouldn't his lawyers be pounding the doors of every court in America? The fact that he hasn't, at least not yet, only adds more fuel to the fire. Here's the audience question. If you were Trump and a major news outlet accused you of literally bribing the FBI in connection to a murder case, wouldn't you fight back instantly? Wouldn't you demand the tape be released in full to prove your innocence? The silence here speaks louder than words. But here's the twist. The CNN leak didn't just point fingers at Trump. It pointed fingers at the FBI. Because if the tape is real, then the Bureau wasn't just approached, it was solicited. Trump allegedly believed they might play ball. That means he either thought they were corruptible, or he already knew they were. Either way, it's a damning reflection on America's top law enforcement agency. And that's what made this leak nuclear. It wasn't just about Trump. It was about whether the FBI, the supposed protector of justice, could be bought. Whether its agents, sworn to uphold the law, might hesitate when the man offering them the world whispered into their ear. The first chapter of this story doesn't just set the stage. It rattles the foundation. Because if CNN's leak is authentic, then we're not looking at politics as usual. We're looking at something darker. Something that suggests the murder of Charlie Kirk may not have been the random act of violence we were told, but part of a web so tangled that even presidents felt the need to intervene. And just when viewers thought the CNN leak was the peak of the story, another detail emerged. Something buried in the timeline. Something that suggested the tape wasn't just a desperate plea. It was a move in a much larger game. But what came next would change everything. The air was electric that day at Utah Valley University. Students and locals alike had poured into the open-air quad, waiting for Charlie Kirk, the young, firebrand co-founder of Turning Point USA. For years, he had been a lightning rod, drawing admiration from conservatives and equal amounts of criticism from liberals. But no one, no matter their politics, could have predicted how his final speech would end. Close your eyes and picture the scene. Hundreds gathered under a wide Utah sky, banners snapping in the breeze, volunteers passing out pamphlets, laughter and chatter filling the air. Kirk was in his element, energetic, sharp, feeding off the crowd. He thrived on this kind of setting, face-to-face with supporters, challenging critics, leaving people either inspired or infuriated. It was vintage Kirk. And then, in an instant, it all came crashing down. The first gunshot didn't sound like a gunshot to many in the crowd. Some thought it was a firecracker, a prank, maybe even a mic malfunction. But when the second rang out, there was no mistaking it. The crowd's cheer turned into a scream. Panic spread like wildfire. People ducked, others bolted, some froze in shock. The crisp September afternoon became a nightmare. And there, at the center, was Kirk, struck down, collapsing to the ground, his supporters rushing to him, blood seeping into the pavement. Eyewitnesses would later describe the chaos with trembling voices. It was like the whole world flipped in 1 second. Mothers grabbed children, students tripped over chairs, security scrambled, but too late. The sound of sirens was the only thing louder than the screaming. Now, here's where the story takes its first sharp turn. Within hours, law enforcement had cordoned off the area. Forensics teams swarmed the rooftop of a nearby building where they suspected the shooter had positioned himself. And what did they find? A towel, a screwdriver, a rifle. The towel was dark-colored, wrapped around the weapon as if hastily concealed. The screwdriver, left behind like an afterthought, but carrying something no one could ignore, DNA. Kash Patel, the FBI director, didn't wait long to make a statement. Just days after the attack, he went on Fox and Friends with a chilling update. The DNA, he said, wasn't just a random trace. It was a match. Tyler Robinson, a 22-year-old man from Orem. His genetic fingerprint was on both the towel and the screwdriver, linking him directly to the scene. Patel didn't mince words. The DNA hits from the towel that was wrapped around the firearm and the DNA on the screwdriver are positively processed for the suspect in custody. It should have been case closed. A suspect tied to the weapon, tied to the rooftop, tied to the scene. But here's where the cracks began to form. Tyler Robinson didn't confess. He didn't explain. He didn't offer any insight into his motives, nor did he give investigators a story that could be checked or cross-examined. Instead, he stayed silent, refusing to cooperate. And silence, in a case like this, is deafening. Because silence can mean guilt. But silence can also mean fear. Think about it. If Robinson acted alone, why stay quiet when confronted with evidence? Why not try to spin the story, plead insanity, or claim an accident? Silence only makes sense if there's something bigger at play, something he's too afraid to reveal. This is where the murder of Charlie Kirk begins to feel less like an isolated act of violence and more like the opening act of a larger play. And that's exactly why, when the CNN tape surfaced later, it didn't sound like a random coincidence. It sounded like a missing puzzle piece sliding into place. But before we get to the leak, let's dwell on the man at the center of it all, Charlie Kirk. For his supporters, Kirk was more than an activist. He was a symbol of youth in the conservative movement, a man who had built an empire out of fiery campus debates and social media showdowns. His rise was meteoric, and his influence undeniable. His death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a message, and maybe that's why it rattled so many people. The murder wasn't random. It wasn't a mugging gone wrong. It wasn't a domestic dispute. It was a targeted shooting in the middle of a speech, in broad daylight, in front of witnesses. Whoever pulled the trigger wanted maximum impact. They wanted to silence not just Kirk, but everything he represented. Now, think about the broader implications. Kirk wasn't just any conservative voice. He was tied directly to Trump's movement. Turning Point USA wasn't just an organization. It was a pipeline, fueling the next generation of Republican politics. His murder hit the conservative base like a lightning strike. And in politics, timing is everything. His death came at a moment when the right was already fractured, already under pressure, already watching enemies circle. That's what made it so explosive. Here's a question for you. If Robinson was truly the lone gunman, what was his motive? What drove a 22-year-old to assassinate one of the most prominent conservative figures in America? The FBI hasn't told us. Robinson hasn't told us. And that silence is where conspiracy thrives. Was he ideologically opposed to Kirk? Was he manipulated? Was he paid? Or was he just a pawn in a much larger game? And here's where things get chilling. Because the DNA evidence, while damning, also raised eyebrows. Forensic science is powerful, but it's also vulnerable. Evidence can be planted. Scenes can be staged. And when you add in the fact that Robinson refused to cooperate, it left a gap big enough for questions, big enough for speculation, big enough for doubt. Who exactly is Pope Leo XIV, and why would his voice matter in the story of Charlie Kirk's death? On the surface, the Pope is a religious leader, the head of the Catholic Church, a man expected to focus on faith, charity, and spirituality. But history has shown us again and again that popes are not just holy figures. They are political players, power brokers, gatekeepers of secrets that stretch back centuries. And Leo XIV, more than most, has carried himself not as a distant theologian, but as a man willing to wade into the murky waters of global affairs. Now pause and think about that. Why would a pope, who could remain silent, choose instead to make a statement that would rattle governments, elites, and intelligence communities worldwide? Why did he step into the Charlie Kirk case, a case that most church leaders would have politely avoided? The answer lies not in what he said, but in who he is and what the Vatican represents in the modern world. Let's start with Leo XIV's reputation. He rose through the ranks not as a quiet scholar, but as a forceful personality. He is known for breaking tradition, for making off-the-cuff remarks that ripple across headlines, and for occasionally hinting at truths that others in his position would bury. To the faithful, he is a shepherd. To the cynical, he is a disruptor. And to the powerful, he is a wild card, the kind of man who might just say something they'd rather leave unsaid. And here's the twist. Leo XIV didn't inherit a quiet Vatican. He stepped into an institution already tangled in centuries of controversy. Think of the Vatican archives, documents hidden away, knowledge restricted to only the highest levels of the Church. Think of the scandals the Vatican has weathered, banking schemes, intelligence ties, political alliances forged in secrecy. When Leo XIV hinted that Charlie Kirk died protecting a secret, he wasn't speaking as an outsider speculating. He was speaking as a man at the very center of one of the most secretive institutions on earth. Ask yourself this. If a pope knows about Kirk's death, what does that imply? That the Vatican is watching events far beyond Rome. That it has eyes and ears in places you wouldn't imagine. The Vatican is small geographically, but its influence spans continents, governments, intelligence agencies. It is a spiderweb of connections that the average person never sees. And when that web trembles, it means something has touched it. So let's explore why Leo XIV would connect Kirk's death to global elites. Perhaps he wanted to expose them, subtly, without naming names. Perhaps he was pressured into making a statement as a warning. Or perhaps, in one of those strange ironies of power, he was trying to clear the Vatican's own conscience by hinting at a truth they couldn't fully release. After all, popes have spoken cryptically before. Warnings about wars, prophecies about leaders, statements that only later revealed their full meaning. Consider this. Throughout history, the Vatican has always known more than it says. During World War II, whispers about secret deals. During the Cold War, connections with intelligence agencies. Even in modern times, influence over global banking systems and political negotiations. Do you really believe the Pope stumbled across the Kirk story by accident? Or is it more likely that Vatican networks had already flagged Kirk's discovery, already recognized its danger, and already understood why his life was cut short? Now, here's where the contradiction becomes irresistible. The Pope is supposed to be a voice of truth, a defender of the innocent, a moral guide. But when Leo XIV spoke about Kirk, he didn't reveal the details. He didn't show us the evidence. He dangled the claim. He died protecting a secret and left it hanging in the air. Why? Was it fear? Was it strategy? Was it his way of telling the world without telling the world? Imagine having the truth but being unable to speak it fully. Imagine dropping just enough of it to spark curiosity, but not enough to risk total exposure. That's the Vatican's specialty, secrecy veiled as revelation. So what does Leo XIV gain from this? Authority, for one. Suddenly, the Pope is not just a religious leader. He is a player in the drama. His words remind us that the Vatican isn't merely a place of prayer. It's a global power center, with information pipelines that stretch into politics, finance, and, yes, even into the mysterious death of an American activist. Think about how chilling this really is. A man dies in Utah, and the Pope, thousands of miles away, weighs in. That's not coincidence. That's connection. That's proof that Kirk's story had crossed into circles we don't see. Circles where popes, presidents, and billionaires trade knowledge like currency. And here's the irony. Leo XIV may not even have wanted to speak. Maybe his hand was forced. Maybe factions inside the Vatican, divided as they always are, pushed him to say something before silence became complicity. Or maybe, and this is more unsettling, he wanted to make sure the elites knew that the Vatican knew. A subtle power move. A way of saying, we are watching you too. But whatever his motive, the impact is undeniable. When the Pope says Kirk died protecting a secret, the world listens differently. Governments may dismiss conspiracy theorists. Journalists may bury inconvenient narratives. But the Pope? His words echo. His words linger. His words carry weight that cannot be brushed aside. And so, the question grows louder. Why would Pope Leo XIV risk speaking at all? Why tie himself to Kirk's death when silence would have been safer? The answer may lie in the next layer of this story, the Vatican's own connection to secrecy. Because if Kirk stumbled into information tied not just to elites, but to the church itself, then Leo XIV's words weren't just commentary. They were confession. And that confession leads us straight into the shadows of the Vatican's hidden archives, where the secrets of nations and the sins of power are buried, waiting to be uncovered. But if those archives really connect to Charlie Kirk's death, then the stakes aren't just about one man's murder. They're about centuries of control and the one institution that has always outlived its enemies. And that takes us to the heart of the next question. What role did the Vatican itself play in the chain of events that led to Charlie Kirk's last breath? Because what comes next will drag us into the Vatican's deepest vaults, where truth and power collide in ways most people could never imagine. Imagine for a moment a vast underground labyrinth, walls lined with centuries-old manuscripts, guarded by silence thicker than stone. These are the Vatican archives, a place so secretive, so impenetrable, that even presidents, kings, and prime ministers have been denied entry. Inside lie documents said to contain the truths of empires, the scandals of monarchs, and the hidden agreements that shaped the modern world. Now ask yourself, if Charlie Kirk's death is tied to classified knowledge, how far does the Vatican's connection go? And why would Pope Leo XIV hint that his murder wasn't random, but a direct consequence of touching secrets never meant to see daylight? The Vatican is no ordinary state. It's the smallest country in the world, yet its influence stretches across continents. It has its own banking system, intelligence operatives, diplomatic channels, and archives that rival any superpower's vaults of classified files. It doesn't just guide the faithful, it keeps tabs on governments, economies, and movements. If Kirk's discovery brushed up against information tied to elites, there's a chilling possibility. The Vatican already knew. Perhaps they had records. Perhaps they had warnings. Perhaps they had been watching. Let's break this down. Historically, the Vatican has been at the center of power plays most people never hear about. During World War II, the Church walked a razor's edge, holding information about Nazi atrocities while negotiating with Allied leaders. During the Cold War, the Vatican had secret lines of communication into both the West and the East, helping shape outcomes behind closed doors. Even in recent decades, scandals tied to Vatican banking and covert agreements have revealed that this holy city operates as much in politics as it does in prayer. So here's the question. If Kirk's death really was tied to global elites, how could the Vatican not be aware? And if they were aware, why did Leo XIV speak at all? Was it a warning shot, a subtle admission that the Church still holds keys to secrets no government wants revealed? Consider the way secrets move. Information doesn't just vanish. It leaves trails through phone records, emails, financial transfers, and whispers in diplomatic back channels. The Vatican, with its vast intelligence networks, hears those whispers. If Kirk had stumbled across classified intel, maybe related to corruption or hidden alliances, the Vatican may have intercepted traces of it. Which means Leo XIV wasn't just making a philosophical statement about truth and sacrifice. He may have been signaling that the church itself knew exactly what Kirk had uncovered. And here's where things twist darker. The Vatican's connection to global elites isn't just historical. It's ongoing. Banking ties with billionaires, closed-door meetings with political leaders, participation in global forums that set agendas for entire nations. When people talk about the elites, the Vatican is almost always somewhere in that mix, whether openly or in the shadows, which makes the Pope's statement less like an outsider's observation and more like an insider's warning. Think about it. If Kirk's discovery threatened to expose not just politicians or tycoons, but alliances that included the church itself, then Leo XIV's words carry double weight. They're not just about Kirk's bravery. They're about the Vatican's own entanglement in secrets dangerous enough to kill for. Was the Pope trying to absolve the church by hinting at the truth? Or was he trying to get ahead of a revelation he knew could not stay buried forever? And let's not ignore the symbolism. A young activist, shot dead in broad daylight, silenced after stumbling onto forbidden knowledge. A pope, far away in Rome, stepping forward to say he died protecting his secret. That's not just commentary. That's a thread tying Orem, Utah, to the Vatican itself. Suddenly, a local tragedy becomes part of a global story, one that stretches back centuries into the very walls of the Vatican archives. Now ask yourself this. What could be hidden in those archives that connects to Kirk? Could it be evidence of elite networks spanning governments and religious institutions? Could it be records of financial manipulation, political engineering, or shadow deals designed to keep certain truths from ever reaching the public? If the Pope is willing to hint, imagine what he's not saying. And that brings us to the heart of the cliffhanger. The Vatican's involvement in Kirk's story doesn't just mean another institution had knowledge. It means the most secretive institution on Earth may have held the very information Kirk died for. So here's the real danger. If the Vatican knows, then the elites know the Vatican knows. That creates a standoff, a silent war of information. And in that war, pawns like Charlie Kirk don't survive. Which raises the most chilling question of all. If Kirk's discovery was enough to cost him his life, what else lies buried in the Vatican's vaults, waiting for the day someone brave or foolish tries to drag it into the light? Because if the Pope was willing to say this much, then what's still being hidden could change everything we think we know about who truly runs the world. Many Hook, they don't announce themselves. They don't wear uniforms. They move money, influence policy, and sometimes move lives out of the way, quietly, efficiently, forever. That's the image most people have in their heads when they hear the phrase, global elites. It's cinematic, shadowy men and women at private tables, champagne glasses clinking, decisions made over winks and handshakes. But the reality is more mundane and more dangerous. The power of elites lives in systems, in banks, in back channels, in corporate boards, in diplomatic notes never meant to be public. And when someone like Charlie Kirk allegedly stumbles into a piece of that system and threatens to expose it, those systems can respond in ways the public rarely sees. Start with the obvious question, who are the elites? They are not a single club with an official register. They're a web, financiers, political strategists, intelligence operatives, corporate executives, members of royal houses, and sometimes religious figures. They share interests, preserving influence, avoiding disclosure, keeping the mechanisms of control operating smoothly. When their privileges are threatened, their reaction is predictable. Protect the network. Think of the elites as a machine that runs on secrecy. Secrecy lubricates deals, conceals embarrassing links, hides strategies for influencing markets and elections. The machine does not tolerate loose ends. Loose ends leak. Leaks cause instability. Instability endangers the machine. So the machine acts to secure its components. Sometimes that act is a legal maneuver, a lawsuit, or an op-ed campaign. Sometimes it's coercion, pressure, economic retaliation. And in the most extreme and rare cases, it becomes physical. The history of dangerous secrecy is long. Whistleblowers harassed, inconvenient journalists surveilled, inconvenient dossiers quietly bought and buried. Now ask, what happens when an outspoken public figure who thrives on fighting the establishment actually uncovers something real about the establishment itself? That's a contradiction the machine doesn't like. Charlie Kirk was a public figure with a wide audience and a talent for turning attention into momentum. If he'd found a document, a list, a connection, something that linked powerful actors across sectors, that document was a threat in the purest sense. Not because of partisan politics, but because it undermined the machinery that moves money, influence, and accountability out of public view. Elites operate through institutions as much as through people. Corporations shelter leverage. Foundations provide plausible deniability. Offshore entities obscure ownership. Trusted middlemen, lawyers, trustees, advisors, create buffers between the public face and the private reality. This architecture means that even when a scandal surfaces, tracing it to a single culprit is almost impossible. The design is deliberate. Plausible deniability built into corporate structures, legalities that protect the guilty without having to commit crimes in public view. Which brings us to the theater of exposure. Exposure is rarely a single explosive moment. It's a cascade. A file is released here, a testimony appears there, a bank transfer is traced to a shell company, and suddenly a dozen threads converge. Elites fear cascades. They prefer containment. Containment often means controlling narratives, making sure the first version of a story that hits the public is the version that benefits them. That's why PR teams, hired commentators, and friendly outlets exist, to shape perception when facts begin to leak. So where does violence enter the equation? Violence is the blunt instrument when containment fails, when documents can't be buried, when witnesses refuse to be silenced by money or threats, when the ripple of exposure grows too large, too public. Violence is rare because it's risky. It brings heat, investigations, and attention. But it can also be useful as a message. The public, witnessing a brazen act, learns who is dangerous to cross. That chilling effect silences others. The purpose of a public killing, if that is what occurred, isn't just to remove a single human being. It's to send a signal. Now apply that logic to a hypothetical scenario. A right-wing activist with a huge platform finds evidence that ties global actors to shadow operations. He plans to release it, to build a narrative and drag the story into public light. For the machine, this isn't a policy debate. It's a threat to the infrastructure of influence. So the machine moves to neutralize the threat. It has tools: infiltration, character assassination, legal entanglement, economic pressure. If those armaments fail or are judged too slow, the machine may escalate. Here, nuance matters. The idea of a coordinated, multinational cabal ordering a killing is the kind of dramatic claim that fuels fiction and paranoia. But there are also more plausible and more prosaic methods of repression that don't require a global conspiracy meeting in one room. Consider, a frightened financier calls a fixer. A disputed investigative thread is handled through intermediaries. A vulnerable recruit is leveraged with promises or threats. These steps are deniable, compartmentalized, and designed to avoid detection. They are the stuff of real-world influence operations, layered, legal-leaning, and legally gray. Let's not romanticize the villains. The modern elite preserves its interests in ways that are often statistical rather than visceral. They prefer market forces to bullets, legal settlements to indictments. But when faced with a figure who may be reckless, loud, and potentially uncontrollable, someone who could expose the very architecture of their advantage to millions, they might consider exceptional measures. The difference between theory and action is usually calculus, the risk of exposure versus the cost of silencing. If the perceived damage of a leak is catastrophic, the cost of an extreme response sometimes seems acceptable to those calling the shots. Another key element here is the use of proxies. Elites generally don't act directly. They use intermediaries, third-party firms, outsourcing arms, individuals at the margins. These proxies provide two things: distance and deniability. You never see the hand that signs the contract if you're only seeing the person who performs the dirty work. The person on the ground, a disgruntled contractor, an unstable recruit, a radicalized youth, can be the one who carries out the act. Later, the trail leads to them, and to them alone. The higher links look clean on paper. And then there's the information economy. Information is currency. Whistleblowers, insiders, and leakers create value, and the wealthy hoard defenses to protect that value. Elite actors build elaborate defensive infrastructures, legal teams, influence networks, a cache of friendly journalists, and opaque financial channels. When a potential leak emerges, the immediate response is to deploy these systems. Damage control becomes a full-time job. The objective is not to tell the truth. The objective is to minimize disruption. Which brings us back to narrative control. Once the public narrative exists, it becomes much harder to shift. That's why elites invest heavily in narrative preemption. Creating plausible alternative stories, generating doubt, and discrediting the messenger. If Charlie Kirk had evidence, then removing his credibility, painting him as volatile, unhinged, or morally bankrupt, would be one way to neutralize him without resorting to more extreme measures. That's why character assassination is such a common tool. It's cheaper, less risky, and often effective. Still, if character assassination doesn't work, if the evidence is clear and compelling, elites might shift to more coercive measures. But those measures are always wrapped in layers of plausible deniability. Consider how a crime scene can be staged. Consider how certain actors can be manipulated into taking blame. Consider the speed with which a narrative is formed and the institutions that benefit from it. Each step is engineered to protect those at the top from messy exposure. But this is also where the human drama sits. The people who are used as proxies aren't always villains in the way fiction tells us. Many are victims of circumstance, recruited, threatened, or financially enticed. Some are ideologically driven and believe they're doing the right thing. Others are tragically naive. The system is clever because it transforms people into instruments of plausible deniability while leaving the architects untouched. When we talk about global elites, we must also accept the uncomfortable truth that not all elites are monolithic. They have rivalries, factions, and competing interests. Sometimes leaks happen because one faction wants to take down another. Power isn't centrally planned like a novel, it's messy. That messiness is important because it means there are openings, cracks through which truth can seep. It also means that not every dark deed is ordered from the same headquarters. Complexity, however, does not absolve responsibility. If systems enable silencing, directly or indirectly, they remain culpable. So where does that leave us with Charlie Kirk? If the Pope suggests he died protecting a secret tied to elites, we must treat that as a claim that warrants scrutiny, not blind acceptance. The kind of connections we're mapping between secrecy, influence, and lethal outcomes are real phenomena historically documented in cases of whistleblowers and outspoken investigators. But we must be rigorous, separate plausible mechanisms from sensational fantasy, examine evidence, and look for corroboration. Here's the final gut question to sit with. If elites can and do move to silence threats, what does that mean for public life? It means transparency is more vital than ever. It means institutions that protect whistleblowers, independent journalism, and robust legal inquiries are essential defenses. And it means that when a powerful voice is silenced in a glaringly public way, we owe it to truth to ask hard questions about motive, method, and beneficiaries. And on a cliffhanger, we've mapped the machine, described the players, and outlined the methods. We've shown why a person like Charlie Kirk, a loud, public, and influential voice, would be a dangerous variable for the network. But understanding the machine is only half the battle. The real question is, what exactly did Kirk allegedly find inside that machine? Which files, which transactions, which names posed such a catastrophic threat that the machine would move to stop him? What comes next will attempt to answer that exact question, and in doing so, will reveal the single thing elites fear most. Mini hook. If the secret Charlie Kirk died protecting exists, it isn't a rumor. It's a weapon, the kind of truth that can topple reputations, disrupt empires, and rewrite history. So what was it? Begin with the smallest, most dangerous detail. Secrets don't float in the ether. They live in documents, in data, in whispered conversations recorded in the wrong place at the wrong time. They can be a ledger line that reveals a payment, a single email that connects two figures who were supposed to be unrelated, a scan page from a vault that shows a transaction or a treaty that never saw the light of day. The more ordinary the item looks, the more lethal it can be, because ordinary things are the easiest to dismiss. A spreadsheet, a directory, a meeting note, until someone connects the dots. So imagine the scene. Charlie Kirk, scrolling through files late at night, his thumb pausing on a single entry. The entry is small. It looks like bookkeeping. It ends with an account number that, if traced, would lead to other names. Those names would point to institutions and personalities who operate in a sphere where secrecy is the currency. He follows that thread. One link becomes two, two becomes five, and suddenly a pattern emerges. A pattern that suggests coordination across borders, across industries, and across the kind of institutions the public trusts to act on their behalf. Now picture the reaction inside the rooms that monitor these things. A dropped pin on a map that lit up someone's attention. A quiet message. We have a problem. People who spend their lives insulating elites from exposure begin a rapid triage. Identify the leak, trace the source, and determine how to stop dissemination. If the leak's origin sits with someone like Kirk, loud, public, and predisposed to go viral, panic replaces calm. For those who depend on the system's stability, the calculus is cold and quick. Stop the cascade. What might those papers show? There are plausible categories, each dangerous in its own way. Financial webs and laundering channels. A ledger could show transfers from a foundation or shell corporation to foreign entities or to private accounts tied to politicians, clergy, or corporate executives. Traced far enough, such transfers could reveal quid pro quos, favors granted in exchange for regulatory wiggle room, policy shifts quietly coordinated across jurisdictions, or slush funds used to buy silence. Intelligence and backchannel cooperation. A document might reveal unofficial communications between intelligence services and private operators, contractors who run operations out of sight. That exposure would show the depth of collusion between state actors and private interests, potentially exposing false flag operations, covert influence campaigns, or agreements to suppress certain public investigations. Religious institution ties. Another kind of secret might link religious institutions to the business of power in ways the faithful would find hard to reconcile. Bank accounts used to channel funds, deals that sacrifice ethics for influence, or correspondence that indicates a more transactional relationship between spiritual leaders and political power brokers. Compromising dossiers. Maybe it isn't paperwork at all, but multimedia, a recording, an intercepted file, or photographic evidence that ties a public figure to actions or to people they would never publicly acknowledge. The threat of that being released can be immediate and devastating. Policy manipulation blueprints. There are times when a planned document exists. An outline of coordinated actions designed to manufacture consent or to manipulate markets and elections. Proof of such coordination would be catastrophic for any institution implicated. Those are the categories that keep powerful people awake at night. Now imagine Kirk holding one of them. We don't have to claim that any single thing is what he found. Our task here is to trace the logic. If Kirk had stumbled across a document from one of these categories, the consequences would be severe, not only for the parties named, but for the stability of the networks that shelter them. Exposure would ripple through governments, banks, and religious halls. It would demand accountability in places where accountability is often avoided through complexity and distance. Here's the crucial human dimension. Charlie Kirk was publicly combative. He didn't quietly hand things to investigators. He was built for showmanship. If he believed he had something big, he would likely want it out quickly. Leveraged for maximum public impact. That strategy is lethal for the keepers of secrecy. Containment depends on delay, legal entanglement, and controlled narratives. A fast, viral disclosure is the worst-case scenario for networks that thrive on opacity. Which brings us to the stratagems the other side would deploy. When a leak threatens systemic stability, three immediate methods are used to blunt it. First, discredit the messenger. If the public doubts the person carrying the story, the evidence can be marginalized. Smear campaigns, revelations about personal behavior, recharacterization of motives. All are standard tools. The objective is to make people ask, why should we trust this person? Instead of asking, what did they find? Second, bury the lead. Flood the news cycle with competing stories. Create noise so that the story never coheres into a focused narrative. The aim is to erode attention. Scandals require focus to cascade. Third, neutralize the source. This can take many forms: legal pressure, financial coercion, or the darker options, intimidation, offers, or coercion designed to stop publication. The most extreme endpoint of neutralization is physical. It's the last resort because it invites scrutiny, but it is effective for those who can absorb the heat or who believe the benefit outweighs the risk. If you stitch those tactics together in a timeline, a plausible sequence looks like this. Kirk discovers something. He seeks allies. He prepares to go public. The network notices. The network deploys countermeasures. He accelerates. The network escalates. He dies. It's a spine-chilling but logical progression. Now let's pull back to the people in the middle. Not the billionaires who run the machine from a distance, but the operatives who execute. There are specialists whose job is to disrupt narratives. They run psychological operations, discrete legal threats, and media partnerships cultivated to control the frame. The best operatives are invisible. They build plausible deniability into everything. They don't kill. They engineer conditions where someone else, someone with motive or a past, becomes the public face of the act. They orchestrate, not participate. That way, when the wires are traced, the trail ends with a person who looks like an isolated offender. That's where Tyler Robinson, in the narrative we're examining, becomes a tragic figure. Someone with his profile is exactly the kind of person criminals and fixers look for when they need an on-the-ground actor who won't trace back to a bank account or a corporate meeting room. Vulnerable, potentially radicalized, with few resources, he's the perfect disposable instrument. But here's the twist that should keep you up. Often the proxies believe in their own causes. They are recruited through ideology or through promise. They are told stories about enemies, conspiracies, and righteous acts. They may not know the full picture. They think they are part of something meaningful. In that way, the machine manipulates both moral vanity and desperation. So what did Kirk's possible discovery expose that made these methods worth deploying? There are three particularly destabilizing effects a revealed secret can have. Legal liability that unravels institutions. If the evidence creates a legal case that is too clear to hide, for example, paper trails showing embezzlement or criminal collusion, then merely discrediting the messenger won't be enough. The legal system will have to act, and that action can drag down institutions that hide behind layers of corporate and diplomatic cover. Public opinion cascades. If the public turns on institutions, the cost is reputational and financial. Donors flee. Allies recalculate. Political cover evaporates. That's why elites invest so heavily in controlling narratives. Once credibility is lost, power flows backward. Chain reveals. One exposed document often leads to another. Journalists and investigators follow. Each follow uncovers more. A single leak can be the domino that topples a row of them. The machine that thrives on opacity fears this cascade above all else. If Kirk held evidence with any of these characteristics, the urgency behind neutralization becomes more understandable, not justified, but understandable in cold calculus. We have also to consider the possibility that the secret was partial, not a full dossier that singly destroys everything, but a piece that, when combined with other fragments scattered across the web, completes a damning picture. The danger of partial disclosure is that it invites synthesis. That is, a piece of a puzzle may not matter alone, but it matters when 1,000 small pieces are assembled by curious minds and persistent investigators. And this returns us to the role of the Vatican and Pope Leo XIV. Why would a religious leader hint at the existence of such a secret? There are at least two interpretations that matter for the narrative. 1. The Vatican is aware because the documents touched on church interests, perhaps financial or political ties. If so, the Pope's comment could be an attempt to nudge the conversation toward transparency, to pressure other powers into revealing more by signaling that the Church has knowledge and moral authority in the matter. 2. The Pope's remark is strategic, a signal to those in power that the Church regards the issue as dangerous and that the moral authority of the Vatican might be invoked to complicate cover-up efforts. In this interpretation, the Pope is not revealing facts, but shifting the geopolitical risk calculus. Either way, his involvement elevates the stakes. It transforms what could have been a narrowly contained scandal into a story with global institutional implications. At the human level, this is where tragedies get crueler. If a man like Kirk is killed for knowledge, the knowledge doesn't vanish. It becomes a beacon. People begin hunting for it. Allies, enemies, journalists, and opportunists all move toward the light. Every person who touches the story risks being caught up in the tornado. This is where courage and stupidity look alike. The movement that might rise from Kirk's death could be noble, a network of whistleblowers determined to finish what he started. Or it could be reckless, a band of attention seekers who amplify conjecture without evidence, making it easier for elites to dismiss them. Either path matters. Truth moves differently in each. The disciplined pursuit of evidence exposes real wrongdoing. The noisy pursuit feeds hysteria and provides cover for those who hide. So what should observers do? The ethical imperative is straightforward. Demand transparency from institutions, protect whistleblowers, and insist on thorough, independent investigations that follow the evidence rather than the headlines. The practical reality is less tidy. Powerful interests have layers of defense. They are practiced at delay, in obfuscation, and in the art of plausible denial. As we close this chapter, consider the scale of the gamble. If a single discovery can lead to a man's death, then the power to retract a secret is itself a form of governance. Who governs the governors? Who watches the watchers? That question echoes in every clandestine chamber where secrets are the real currency. Cliffhanger. Charlie Kirk allegedly died protecting a secret that could fracture institutions, topple reputations, and reveal how the world really operates behind closed doors. But if that secret exists, where is it now? Did he leave a trail, a backup, a confidant who can bring it to light? Or did the keepers of the machine manage to swallow the trace, turning a public killing into a permanent blackout? What comes next will hunt that trail. It will search the people who knew Kirk best, the messages he left unsent, the digital breadcrumbs that could still be stitched together. And in doing so, it will reveal the most dangerous possibility of all, that the secret was already in circulation long before Kirk held it, and someone wanted it back. Begin with the image everyone remembers, a young man in handcuffs, the chalk outline of a life he'd now be forced to explain, and a nation demanding answers. Tyler Robinson, 22, became the name attached to Charlie Kirk's death the moment police took him into custody. Faces in the crowd pointed. Reporters filled airtime. Social feeds exploded with hot takes. But the easiest explanation is rarely the full one. The guy with the gun is not always the person who pulled the strings. Let's be honest. It's comfortable to view violent acts through a simple lens. Someone did something wrong. Someone must face justice. The courts exist to deliver that justice. But complex crimes rarely fit neat narratives. They sit in gray zones. They involve people who can be manipulated, recruited, or used as shields by parties who remain invisible in public view. When powerful actors want deniability, they find plausible deniers, and people like Tyler Robinson are tragically useful. Who is Tyler Robinson? Public records and initial reporting sketch a portrait that feels, at once, ordinary and unsettling. A young man in his early 20s. Not wealthy, not famous. Someone who could be susceptible to influence, whether that influence comes from ideology, financial strain, personal grievance, or coercion. Think of him as someone with a biography that could be written to fit a narrative. Lonely, searching for purpose, perhaps easily radicalized. Those are the kinds of people targeted by manipulators, the foot soldiers of actions they cannot trace back to their true sponsors. Start from motive. The official story often goes radicalization, personal grievance, ideological rage. Those are plausible. They're also public-facing. They satisfy a demand for closure. But they also obscure other possibilities. What if motive was manufactured? What if someone discovered a way to turn a troubled life into a weapon? Consider the playbook used by covert operators. Identify a vulnerable subject, build rapport, provide narrative and purpose, then incentivize action, whether through money, belonging, or threats. The subject becomes convinced of a righteousness that justifies extreme acts. Later, when the smoke clears, the subject stands exposed while the architects remain untraceable. Look at recruitment methods. They aren't always cinematic. They can be as mundane as a friendship forged online, a private message, a chat room, or a local contact who offers a listening ear and then offers solutions that escalate quickly. Radicalization is an ecosystem. It can be ideological, a belief system that tells a recruit they're doing God's work. It can be financial, a promise of money for a deed. Or it can be coercion, a threat to the recruit's family, safety, or future unless they comply. The more compartmentalized the operation, the more deniable it becomes to those at the top. We also need to examine capability. Robinson's access to a weapon and to the event location aren't trivial facts. How did he get the gun? Where did it come from? Who provided the towel and screwdriver, items that later tied his DNA to the scene? Those are details that forensic teams will pursue because they trace supply chains. Supply chains reveal networks. A weapon doesn't appear in someone's hands out of nothing. There are paths. Sellers, couriers, middlemen. Each link is a possible avenue to those who arrange the operation. We must also consider grooming. Grooming isn't only sexual, it's strategic. A recruit is eased in, told stories that build trust, praised when they demonstrate loyalty, and financially or emotionally supported, so the recruit's life becomes entangled with the cause. Once the recruit acts, walking away is hard. Shame, fear, or legal consequences keep them silent. The machinery of manipulation thrives on human attachments. That's why operatives prefer recruits with fractured networks. Less accountability, fewer people asking risky questions afterward. Let's ask another uncomfortable question. Did Tyler know what he was doing was part of a larger